Welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Ryan Richards, a residential loan officer and real estate investor based out of Massachusetts and Rhode Island. Today I have another repeat guest joining me on the show, Spenser Molloy, who's an agent with Next Home Realty based out of Lebanon, New Hampshire. Spenser and I have been fortunate to work together very often over the past few years and help a lot of clients get into their next home. What's important that we talk about today is not every transaction is perfect. Some things come up along the way, a lot of which sometimes unpreventable, that you just have to deal with. But it's really important that you have the right team as you start to navigate through these situations, because sometimes big challenges can make big problems, and some problems you can't fix. Obviously, with a good team, you can fix almost any problem. But I've seen it with other people, other clients, with other lender realtor teams where they can't be fixed. And money's on the line, obviously houses are on the line. So we talk through some of the things that we've done to save a few hairy transactions we've had recently and get all of these clients into the home of their dreams. We also talk about the 2025 market. Things are starting to change, and he's noticing it up in Lebanon as well. So if you want to learn more about the market, what to look for in a good buyer agent team, or just hear about some of Spenser and I's recent challenges, then this is an episode you definitely don't want to miss. Please join me in welcoming Spenser Molloy back to the show. Spenser, always a pleasure having you on, and thanks for joining us today.
Of course, Ryan. Thanks for having us.
And I know we've got some exciting stuff to talk about, and you and I have been planning this for a long time to talk about some of the deals that we've put together recently that have had a little bit of moving parts, which that's how real estate goes, but obviously just emphasizes, the importance of having a good team around you to make sure you can navigate the types of things that come up throughout the transaction. So we'll definitely dive into some of those stories and maybe talk a little bit about the market.
I think moving parts is an understatement. I think these are been some of the most complicated deals I've ever worked on. I don't know if you would agree, but I definitely think our most recent three, one for the books for sure.
Definitely. Yeah, they're definitely up there. I think they're complicated in their own way just because of the circumstances and the timing of everything. So we can definitely dive into that. But I want to kick things off. I mean, what's going on up in your area? How's things in Lebanon, New Hampshire? What are you seeing on the market side of things? I was just talking to Ben Carboni today about what we're seeing down here in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and his market in Connecticut. Just seeing some things start to change throughout the market. We've noticed homes are sitting a little bit longer, and buyers seem to be a little bit more picky when it comes to housing. So pricing is even more particular. But what are you seeing up in your area in Lebanon? Are you seeing things start to change? And what has the market moved over the past few months? What are you guys seeing up there?
We're definitely seeing things change a little bit up here. I mean, probably much like you guys, we're in a housing crisis. So we always are going to have people wanting to buy homes. The thing that has changed most drastically in the previous 1 to 2 months here is those people who've been wanting to buy homes are being a lot more picky about the house they're buying. For the last few years, homes have been flying off the market here. Yeah, you might see a couple price reductions, but for the most part, it goes on the market. It's, out there for a couple weeks, max 30 days, and it's, flying off. It started to slow down just after 4th of July, I think most noticeably. Usually in the Upper Valley here, which is, where I do most of the business, we have a few different selling cycles. So winter, things in New Hampshire don't move a ton, obviously, because there's snow. The spring market is kind of the big push in March. New inventory comes online, and then it kind of churns all the way through till June. Things contract a little bit as kids get out of school and vacation starts. Summer's in full swing. Obviously, you've got 4th of July, which, limits what people are doing, all the time. Then it revs back up again, usually with fresh inventory post 4th of July. Between now and August, we'll see kind of a market refresh. It dies back down again. When kids go back to school, people get back into the swing of the fall. And then pretty much our selling season ends right around November, the beginning of. So anything left on the market from November through is going to sit for quite a while. That's kind of been the routine for the last few years. What we're seeing right now is there's still a lot of hangover from the spring market. There's houses that have been on the market since March and April that are sitting. There has been less of an influx of new stuff. The new stuff that came online in that secondary cycle, like in the June, July period, which normally would have been off the market by now, by the end of July, is also sitting. So we're starting to see a buildup of inventory without things moving. The buyer pool has not contracted. There is just as many buyers trying to get into our area. Buyers are starting to be a little bit more picky, at least from what we've noticed. The $700,000 home in that price point, I'd say between 6 and 7 is kind of a sweet spot for our area. You would think that the buyers are, buying $1 million properties. I mean, that's the level of pickiness we're getting. And sellers have not responded positively to that. A lot of sellers have dug in their heels and have said, we're going to hold out till someone gives us the exact price we want. And that's what's creating this backup. So I think it's kind of similar to what you guys are seeing down there, but it's certainly this give and take or more of a pull than we've ever seen between the buyer and seller. It's been a seller's market for quite some time.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear. And I feel like that's a reflection of a point of shift, in the sense of if both sides are in disagreement with the type of market we're in, usually that's kind of the sign that we're starting to shift in the other direction. Like sellers still think it's a seller's market. Buyers are now thinking it's a buyer's market because these houses are sitting. So I think, at least my understanding is, I think it's just going to take some time for those two parties to kind of get on the same page with where we're at. And that means sellers have to give a little bit more, and, buyers have to still be realistic that there is still demand and houses, are worth probably close to what they're listed for, but, kind of find that happy medium balance. Is kind of the way I look at things too, is it's a sign of the shift.
I'm gassed up for it to be a buyer's market. I've been waiting for a buyer's market for quite some time. I think it's needed. And just because it turns to be a buyer's market doesn't mean sellers lose. I actually think it gives sellers more of an opportunity. Things might get a little bit more competitive because we need the breathing room, right? Like once we give everyone the social cover, if you will, okay, it's acceptable to make an offer a little bit lower than what the seller's asking, maybe have some concessions in there. Well, we're going to have multiple buyers doing the same thing. So the seller actually might see more offers. They might get a lower price than they had in the past, but it's not going to be drastic where, they're losing $100,000 on the property. That's not going to happen. You just have to give that little breathing room, and then I think it'll start to turn again. It'll be a little bit more cooperative versus one-sided.
Yeah, I would agree too. And that's what another thing Ben and I were talking about as well, is the seller credits are, they're back. Like, not that they were gone, but it was, depending on the property, it was difficult to get, an offer accepted with a seller credit, especially with low down payments. I know you and I have done that a lot together, regardless, but generally speaking, it was more difficult. And I see a lot more transactions coming through with the seller paying for all the buyer's closing costs. So that, is another affordability benefit for buyers, because usually, more often than not, the actual amount of cash needed at closing is typically the biggest hindrance for new buyers as opposed to the payment. A lot of buyers would, as much as they don't want to, they would make the monthly payment to get in the house, but usually it's some form of barrier with the cash to close. Thankfully, there's a lot of great programs that obviously we know, throughout New England that provide assistance for the down payment and closing costs. But if you make too much money or your credit score doesn't meet the requirements, then you don't have access to those options. Or if you're not a first-time home buyer, obviously that would potentially limit you on your options as well. So having the ability to get these credits again, I think, is a great thing, for those buyers who are kind of sitting on the sidelines waiting to save, rather than wait 2 more years to save money. Instead of, that house that's listed for $600, instead of offering $575, just, offer 6 and get a credit, right? Cover all your closing costs. So I think that's a good trend for buyers.
And I think that's kind of a best kept secret, or I think sellers kind of, I don't know, the term in the closet seems a little strange, but most sellers, when you approach them, with that stuff, they don't want to tell everybody that they gave in and they gave the buyer, XYZ to sell their house. But I mean, we've been cranking transactions. Almost every transaction we've done has had some kind of concession or something from the seller to incentivize the buyer, whether that is, helping them with repairs or they're contributing to some buyer agency. They're willing to help make the transaction work, because once they see the offer in front of them, they also, I think, are getting a little bit more realistic about this might not be something we see again. Again, it's like a best kept secret. I don't think people want to advertise that the sellers are willing to negotiate yet. That's definitely not the market trend. It's heading that way, but not there. But it's certainly happening. And the buyers are getting excited because they're under the illusion that, nobody will give a concession and nobody will help them out. So when they go under agreement and we go through that negotiation process, it kind of gives the buyer some more hope too, which is super, super motivating and exciting for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned, I know we've done almost all of your transactions do have some sort of credit. And I think it's a very underutilized tool because I think for I would say a lot of agents fell into the COVID, and of course, a lot of agents are great. I love agents. I'm not dissing agents, but I think a lot of people got, and loan officers too, they got stuck in the post-COVID mentality for too long. That obviously 2021, 2020, the housing market was so crazy. Yeah, it was really difficult to ask for credits. And it was really difficult to have strong contingencies in your offer and long due diligence periods. But now that we're starting to shift, and even over the past year or two, doesn't mean you can't ask for those types of things because they serve your client. So I think real estate got in that rut of this is the new normal, but now because of where the market is, it's starting to become more widespread. Obviously, people like yourself who are great agents and do whatever they need to get their client the best deal. Not saying all agents don't do that, but those who go for that ideal structure for their client every time have still found success. And now I think the rest of the market's waking up to the fact that, okay, we can do that. We can ask for credits and we can negotiate.
Yeah, I'm going to chirp my fellow agents here for a moment. I think the buyer process and seller process has gotten harder just because of all the moving parts that you're dealing with. Not only, just the world as a whole has changed and there's a lot of, angst and anxiety about what's going on, but selling houses has changed quite a bit too. As far as negotiations and what can be negotiated and what cannot be, if you look at real estate as a whole in the last 7 months, there's a lot of moving parts going on. And I think as agents, we're contributing to some of this too, because there's a lot of agents who don't really want to put in that extra work or aren't comfortable with the level of negotiations that it now takes to get a deal done. And when your agent's not confident in that stuff, that then translates obviously over to the client, which creates nervousness and, not being transparent and upfront about what's going to happen and what they can expect, being realistic about outcomes on the seller side, about pricing, and then on the buyer side about how important it is to have, for example, financing in place. And that financing may not be financing you've heard of before. It may not be the conventional, 30-year type way that, your parents did. I think it's on the agents now to kind of steer it a little bit. And we're contributing slightly to the turn here that's happening. I think it's creating some friction.
Yeah, no, I would agree as well. And I think that second point that you mentioned, I want to dive into a little bit with the moving parts, because I do feel like for whatever reason, I haven't quite pinpointed exactly where this trend is coming from. I think, well, if I had to surmise, I think probably from an affordability challenge, where a lot of the deals we put together on the lending side, are tight. A lot of the numbers are tight, and a lot of the appraisals that we're shooting for are close to asking price or close to purchase price. That's everything's a little bit tighter. So I think that creates more moving parts in and of itself. But a lot of the transactions that we collectively, you and I and myself, just in general, do have a lot of moving parts because for whatever reason, we're stretching to make the numbers work, or, we're at the top of certain, clients' budgets. And I think that's, definitely something we're seeing now, where there are creating more moving parts because of the affordability challenge. But obviously having access to seller credits and things like that can of course help. But I know you and I have had a few transactions that definitely had some moving parts.
Oh, again, moving parts, I think, is the understatement. I feel like in the last couple months, we've been asked to do way more. It's totally within our capability, but way more than we should have to do. And that's a direct result of others not being able to rise to the occasion and provide good service. I think that's really what it comes down to. And that's not bashing anybody. That's just, there's a line of like, how committed are you to getting the deal done, right? And everybody is going to tell you, yeah, I'm committed. I'll do whatever it takes, until it's time to do whatever it takes. And then it seems like it becomes this like, not it. Whoever can grab the short straw, that's who it falls to get these things done. And that seems to be the market. At least that's been the few transactions that, not few, we've done a lot of them now, that we've done with you. I feel you and I are always
whatever it
short
takes.
Straw of like, okay, I guess we're going to have to do this. I mean, think of how many hats we've worn just in the last 60 days.
Sure. And I think that's, for those listening, you hear myself and a lot of the guests talk about it all the time, but your team is just so important, because at the end of the day, like you said, usually in a transaction, there's one party, whether it's, the seller's attorney, the buyer's attorney, the buyer's agent, listing agent, lender, there's usually appraiser, there's usually someone who's not at the same, I don't want to say commitment level, but the same responsiveness and drive committed to the transaction.
I think we can get a little ballsy, Ryan. I would say commitment level. I think that's the perfect label. I don't think it has anything to do with drive. I think it's commitment, right? Like, you're getting paid to do X, Y, Z, and some people see it as like, well, that's not part of my paycheck, so therefore I'm not doing that. My job ended 12 hours ago.
Right. Which is,
I definitely think commitment's the right word.
I'm glad you went there, because it needed to be said. But that's why I think for buyers and even for sellers, you need to make sure your team is not that, because if you have a rock star team, they'll pick up the slack of anyone else in the transaction who's not, doing what's necessary. And I feel like some of the transaction that I know we're going to dive into here is had a lot of moving parts that without the right management and the right team, between the lender, myself, and the buyer's agent with you, and a really solid attorney or title company, these deals wouldn't have happened. And, it was at the point where potentially, not only would it not close, but there's deposit risk, in some of the transactions, depending on what happens, So you want to make sure you have the right team to pick up the slack to get the loan closed, get the buyer into their house, and be able to drive it home, because someone has to eventually get in the driver's seat and, put the car in gear. Everyone can tell you where to go and the directions, but like you said, when it's time to buckle up, you need the team who's going to do that.
Agreed. And I'll even add one more little thing in there too, just to paint this picture a little bit further. I also think you have to be okay with the team. The team has to be able to make decisions in real time that, literally mean change directions, go somewhere else, onboard team members, offboard, as we kind of go into this transaction, I don't think if yourself or me or anyone else on the team was not able to say, hey guys, like, we can't keep doing it this way. We got to pivot, or we onboarded a new title company in the middle of, the transaction. If collectively we weren't responsive enough to do that, I think that creates some friction too. So it's even more about not only having a good team, but a team that's tested and doesn't take things, they don't get offended when you're like, hey, this isn't working. We got to try something else. I don't know what the right word is. It doesn't come to mind. For chemistry seems odd again to use, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, like synergy. Sure.
Synergy. Good word right there.
Yeah, I found that in a dictionary the other day. No. But no, absolutely. You need people who are on the same page. And I think, we'll dive into this and kind of show some of the points that we're talking about. But this transaction could have went completely sideways and ended pretty poorly with the wrong team. So for context, let's dive into our balancing act we had here. And I think, for those listening, this type of stuff happens a lot, behind, maybe not this type of stuff, but stuff like this happens behind the scenes. And the good team, you don't even realize the extent of the issue or that you even have one because of how they managed it. I think we did a really good job of that in this, where the buyers weren't freaking out, as far as I know, because we had a plan, we changed direction, changed course, and we committed we can get this done if you follow our instruction. And I think that's really important, because I get a lot of calls from other people buying houses where their lender, is unresponsive, or their agent, isn't helping, and they feel like they're not getting good advice. I have friends call me and say, hey, I'm in this transaction. I know you're not involved, but what's your opinion on this? Because my, point of contact, my agent, my lender won't answer me. And then, so I'll step in and help, but they're in a point of stress and angst and fear. They have money on the line and they need someone to talk to, and they're not there. But if you have the right people, you can navigate these things as seamlessly as possible,
Agreed. And before we keep saying, before we do this, I think that communication between the lender and agent is paramount, right? I am not a lender. Well, you are kind of a realtor, I guess, but you don't sell houses.
No.
The idea that I have to stay in my lane and I'm not, or shouldn't know what's going on in your world, or not be able to help answer some questions or guide, is totally a detriment to the whole thing. And again, contributes to you just have to do whatever it takes. I'm not a mortgage lender, but I'm pretty familiar at this point with quite a few different products. And if you can't get on the phone, I can at least triage your situation until, you're ready to talk to somebody, or vice versa. I think you have to be cross-functional. And I'm not an attorney either. And again, nor are you, but could we, at least be able to understand or guide our client through some, typical questions? Yeah, at least enough to make them feel comfortable and keep the ball rolling,
sure, versus
always waiting for somebody else to, do it for us.
Oh, absolutely. You need to have enough knowledge to push it along, and help, guide the client, of course. And I think, so for this one, let's start with some dates. So the quick synopsis: Spenser and I had a transaction that our clients the buyer clients were purchasing another property. They were also selling a property that Spenser's clients were buying from them. So they were buying and selling at the same time, which obviously has more moving parts, fundamentally. But some things changed throughout the transaction that we had to pivot on in a couple different directions. So Spenser, when did they go under contract on the purchase?
Which purchase are we talking about now? There's a couple. So why don't we do like a summary, right? So we identified a home they wanted to purchase in April, our buyer clients.
Okay. And when did they... Go ahead.
And the buyers who were purchasing our client's home did not make the decision to purchase our client's home until beginning of June or so. We went under agreement on our buyer, the one who identified the home earlier, mid-June. I believe right around June 15th.
So at that point, both properties were under contract around mid-June.
Correct. And that timeline, I might be off by a few days because that was now almost 2 months ago, but pretty damn close.
Yeah.
They were going under at the exact same time.
So then fast forward to a week and a half before closing. We had some things change. So one of the things that changed on the financing side was the buyer who was also selling their house was originally putting a large down payment into the transaction, several $100,000. They found out midway through the process that they actually didn't have access to those funds the way they thought they would. Now, from our side of things as the lender, we already cleared the loan to close because we documented they have the funds and there was nothing that prohibited them from accessing the funds. But through a family type matter, they weren't able to actually get all of those funds. And the loan's already cleared to close, financing date's already passed, and the buyer calls and says, I can only put down half of what I thought I could originally put down. What do we do? So this is where we had to start to unravel the situation. Now, as I talked, of course, with you, Spenser, you said, well, they're actually selling this other property that we didn't really care about on the loan side, but they were selling another property that they were getting funds from, which is enter buyer B.
Should we scare the audience, Ryan, or should we just keep, protecting them from,
no, this is an unfiltered
some of these
show.
Story details? Yeah,
it's unfiltered.
So, as Ryan just outlined, right, we keep in mind I'm only representing buyer one. So the buyer who just all of a sudden didn't have access to their funds is my client. Buyer 2, who we're referencing, is not my client, but is purchasing the home that my client is selling to move into their next property with their family.
Right.
As we've passed all of these deadlines, and this is a plug towards Ryan because I have a habit of doing this to Ryan, not intentionally, but it seems to work out. We double and triple checked a lot of these things. So we made sure that the funds were in place. They knew where the money was going. And this entire time, the buyer, who was not my client, also had been checked in on and, hey, make sure we're moving this towards closing. Here's our closing dates. You guys have the funds, blah, blah, blah. All the moving parts that should be happening in a transaction. Ryan's being a little modest when we got past the financing deadline and realized there were no funds. Not only did our client have to pivot, meaning mine, buyer 1, but then we unearthed that buyer number 2 may not have been as familiar with purchasing real estate as they had initially told us they had been. And that opened up a whole new can of worms. Do you want me to just keep going, or you want to jump in here on your part?
Sure, I can jump in and we'll go back and forth.
I would love to know your perspective on this. What happened once I said, Brian, hey, by the way, I got a new client for you.
And that's the next phase of this is the enter, buyer 2, who I wasn't working with at the time. But the challenging part is buyer 1 couldn't access half of their funds, but they don't qualify for any more of a mortgage. So I can't just allow them to put less money down. They need to put, pretty close to that down payment to qualify. And this is, several $100,000. This isn't just put an extra $5,000 down and close the deal. So now the house that they were selling to the other buyer 2 in this example, needed to close on the same day or before the closing of the house that they were buying. So that obviously put a timeline on things, time crunch. At this point, when we started this conversation, buyer 2, who was purchasing the house from the other buyer who was also in the process of buying, their mortgage lender pretty much dropped the ball. They had gotten a
pretty much did. There was no, they didn't even have the ball, I would say.
They did not have the ball at all. So they were in the process for about 2 weeks at this point. This is starting near the end of June. They'd already been in the mortgage process for 2 weeks, and the lender had just completely made a mess of the financing. The buyers weren't even close to being approved. They were actually probably in the process of being denied. They had a ton of problems with the appraisal, which none of them should have been there in the first place. And the borrowers didn't qualify. They thought they were going to need no money at closing. I looked at the numbers. They were going to need almost $20,000 in closing, which they didn't have. So the whole transaction from the lender side of that was a mess. So at that point, we need to step in. We need to get this other loan closed because we have no way of the other buyer getting the funds to qualify and close on this other house that they have a deposit on with no financing contingency. So we had kind of a situation. But we only had...
Keeping in mind, buyer number 2 is not my client or your client.
Not at that point, no.
Exactly.
So we stepped in and, Spenser obviously called me and said, hey, we need to take control of this other side of the transaction. Can you, step in to help with the loan? How fast? He asked me, how fast can you close? And I said, like, technically or practically? And you said, well, I think you said, give me both answers. And I said, well, technically, it's actually a legal requirement. There's rules as far as how fast we can close a loan based on compliance and stuff like that. And the answer is 10 days. And I said, how fast can we realistically do it? I said, probably pretty close, and which obviously is a very quick closing. But of course we can do it. So we ended up closing that loan in 12 calendar days. So it was like, eight business days, on the same day as the purchase for the other client, getting them the funds they need and getting them both in the house. But through that process, obviously a lot of stuff has to get orchestrated. We have to start the loan application. We have to do another appraisal in that time frame. We have to get a title report. So we had to, I had to call, we had to find a title company that could get us the report that fast. Thankfully, we had someone. Shout out to Summit Title in Bedford, New Hampshire. They were able to get us the title report in like 5 days, which obviously is pretty difficult to do. We rushed the appraisal, got the appraisal done in about 4 days. We got the appraisal done and back with none of the issues that the other lender had. The value worked. It was a good report. The other lender's appraiser went crazy on a bunch of things that should never have been issues, but would have prevented that transaction from closing. Restructured the loan so that the buyers only needed half of what they thought they were going to from the other lender. The other lender said that they were going to need like $20,000. We came in at 10 based on how we structured it. And we gave them a lower rate, lower closing costs. So across the board, they win. And we were able to get the transaction closed. But obviously that's a tough situation to navigate through, where Spenser has to coordinate on his side of things to make sure, all the pieces are coming together with, the appraisal scheduling and anything else. There's so many more things, all the little pieces that come together to make that work. And then on our side, we had to get the loan done in, 8 business days. So all of our verifications had to get done and our documentation. And, that means as a loan officer, I'm talking to the clients at, 8:30 at night, 6, 7, 8 in the morning before work, because we have to get the documents back.
On the weekends? We worked through not 1, but 2 full weekends.
Yeah. Goodness. Going over stuff on the weekends just to make sure we can keep the timeline, because every time they send documents, it needs to be reviewed. And then obviously we have to coordinate, the closings, right? We have, an attorney, a title company out of Bedford handling a closing in Lebanon. So we need to make sure that the coordination's there to actually get the money from point A to point B. Buyers can get there for signing, managing their work schedules. So obviously a lot of moving pieces, but we thankfully got that one done. And our recap.
I think once again, you're being a little bit modest as far as that summary did not.
I was just going to say
how many things you did.
We made it sound easy.
Move all of that.
We made it sound easy, but that's the good part. I mean, truthfully, when you have a team that really is committed to the transaction and is willing to do whatever it takes to make the loan, the client able to purchase the property and protect their deposits, then you come into it with a plan. They give you a plan. So we came to the buyers, here's exactly what we're going to do. If you follow all these steps and listen to our instructions and give us things timely, no problem. We'll get the loan closed. And then that's where you get them to buy in as well, because if the buyers had any pushback or if they didn't trust us to handle this and manage it for them, then this would have never came together. So you need the right team to orchestrate the whole thing, not only from the logistics standpoint, but just from confidence to the clients with a plan.
I think being transparent with your clients, now talking to the audience too, is super, super pivotal. If you're shaky, if you're not, amping up your lender, and your attorneys at the same time, right? Like in this business, it's very, very easy for the realtor to be, front and center. We're the ones pulling it together, but you also have to make sure that you can vouch for everybody. If I was not 100% behind Ryan in conveying that, yeah, we're going to get this done. I've worked with Ryan on X amount of transactions just this year, X amount this month. Like if you kind of take the spotlight for yourself, that's a huge component here too, because it's not just confidence in me. The buyer and the client have to have confidence in everybody touching their file. This one obviously is like super, super complicated, but there's probably 15 people who touched this file in 8 days. Or 12
Absolutely.
days.
Absolutely. And that first point you made is really important because again, if obviously in this transaction, there was no, listing agent per se on this, from one of the buyer's side, which was, really you kind of helping out. But if that were the case, you'd have to call as a lender, if I'm stepping in on a transaction late in the game, a week before closing, that's a phone call. You want your lender to call the listing agent to say, hey, look, I know I'm coming in late, but I'm here, I'm available, I'll communicate. This is what's going to happen in the next 72 hours. You can expect this in the next week, and I'll have, final answers for you by following Friday, whatever the timeline is. But again, come in with a plan, come in with confidence, lay out the expectations and communicate. And now the stress for the situation just went down, dramatically. And then of course, part 2 is you got to execute. You can't just say things, you got to do them. But that's the start of a good transaction. So, if you're listening to this and you're thinking about buying a house and you're thinking about building your team, you want to make sure you talk to your lender and your realtor about, their availability, Will you answer calls on the weekends? Will you answer my text after hours? Will you talk to the listing agent if I need you to? How involved are you in the transaction? Because I think that's a big piece that a lot of loan officers miss, is they'll communicate for the pre-approval, but then you get in the process and they go away. Now you're dealing with like a processor or another point of contact. Same with the attorneys. A lot of attorneys, it goes to the paralegal, and a lot of paralegals are great, but some aren't. So you want to make sure you understand the people you're working with, how available they are to you, how committed they are to the transaction. And you can ask them, tell me about a situation that you saved. Was there a deal that went sideways that you figured out? How'd you do it? So just some good questions to keep in mind.
I also go as far as say, ask the realtor what kind of relationship they have with the lender. Put it on both sides. Like if you're hiring me as your agent, I would hope someone would say, if you're recommending Ryan, how do you know Ryan? Is Ryan like a Rocket Mortgage type? I know we can't call people out like that on podcasts, but there's hundreds of loan officers at these huge companies. You might switch. I've seen people use Rocket Mortgage. They've switched lenders 4 or 5 times in a 30-day period. And on the lender side, I think it's just as important. Like if your lender isn't working closely with your realtor or isn't comfortable, doesn't have that relationship, those are all red flags that it's only going to hurt the client.
Absolutely. 100%. And I just had, in the last 2 weeks obviously we had this situation a couple weeks ago. I just got a call on Friday from another situation. A realtor I work with, her client tried to go through a big national bank. And obviously, we know how we feel about the mortgage servicing of institutions that are that big. It's just, you don't get personal service. And typically, it's like the DMV, grab a number, take a ticket. We'll get back to you in whatever wait time we've decided is appropriate. So he was in the transaction for four weeks in the mortgage process. Keep in mind, we just said we closed the loan in 12 days. He's been in the mortgage process for 4 weeks. He gets an email at 5:00 on a Thursday. Basically, the email said, "Thank you for your work with us thus far. However, we're going to have to deny your loan due to excess liabilities." That's it. Email.
What the hell does that even mean?
Well, essentially that means that the initial pre-approval, they didn't do their job because, something changed in the profile. So they probably missed something, or they miscalculated something, or usually it means they didn't validate something. Because a lot of times the problem is a lot of these online institutions, people go in, the system asks you, how much money do you make per month? And someone will go, I make $10,000 per month. How much money do you have in the bank? $60,000. And then depending on the institution, they'll give you an approval letter just based off of the information you put in. But not to say people lie, that's not true. But sometimes the way we look at things is different than what you think you actually make. For example, if you're a business owner and this year you're having a killer year, and you're like, I'm making, $60,000 a month. One of those institutions could approve you for a lot without validating it. But if we look at your income, well, obviously you haven't filed a tax return yet for 2025, so anything you've made so far this year doesn't count, and depending on the program, 90% of programs. So that doesn't count. So that number's already wrong just because you're assuming it's the money you're making today, which we can't use because we have to use a tax return. So it's little things like that across the board. I'm not saying people just fluff the numbers, but they just put the information into the best of their knowledge. They don't know how we look at it. And then that creates a problem later. So it could have been something like that. Could have been maybe they didn't pull a hard credit. Maybe they just did a soft credit. So and one of the credit bureaus had their car loan on it that you didn't see in the beginning. You pull a real credit when the application starts. Boom. Now all of a sudden you have an $800 car payment you didn't have before. So stuff like that, I'd say more is usually what happens in a situation like that. But he gets the email at 5 p.m., calls the lender. Of course they don't answer. Voicemail. It's a 1-800 number. Sends an email that night, leaves a long, winded voicemail. Obviously, I'm concerned and I need answers. I don't know what's going on. Can you tell me more? Sends another email saying, please just get back to me in the morning. I would just want to know where things are at. And he calls me Friday morning at 10 and says, I haven't gotten anything yet. And then he tells me at 12, and they haven't told me anything yet. And I said, well, I don't know what the issue is because I don't know the file or your profile, but I always say the same thing. I mean, I can guarantee you this. I can't guarantee I can get your loan closed because I don't know what the issue is. But I can guarantee I'll give you quick answers, open communication, and honest feedback. So I'll be able to tell you within 24 hours of receiving your application whether or not we can make this work. And again, that's where having the right lender is super important, because you need someone who's on your team who can take a look at the numbers, give you some honest feedback, be available, and gives you the context. So if you go to do a pre-approval online and you don't have to give any documentation, like that should feel wrong, right? That should feel wrong. Someone's going to give you $400,000 and not ask for your pay stub. Something's up, right? So I think that's just important for people to keep in mind who are thinking of buying. Make sure your lender's available, make sure they're thorough. They ask you all the right questions. They ask you about your credit. They ask you about your bank statements and your income so that you're on the same page, because it's super important. But I had a situation, another one, not to steal the mic here from you, Spenser, but I had another one where a client, same thing, realtor called me, lender dropped the ball, said, sorry, going to have to deny financing. But the financing contingency already passed. So if they deny financing, the borrower's losing their deposit, which was like $15,000, because they don't have the contingency to bank on anymore. In the end, I looked at the file and there was nothing I could do to fix it. Unfortunately, it was something in the beginning. The lender missed a bankruptcy on their credit. And, I looked at all the different options, and of course there's ways to kind of reduce the waiting period and stuff, but there was no way to get this done. But the lender completely missed that piece at the application. Like, they should have never been pre-approved in the first place. So the borrower, lost their money. That was $15,000.
I mean, I'm not shocked by any of the stuff that you're saying. Some of the transactions we've done in the last, 6 or 7 months have been people starting at those larger companies dealing with those kind of loan officers. I mean, how many times have I called you since 2025 began and been like, Ryan, so-and-so messed it up. You know what I mean? Like, we told them not to go here. They went. Now we're under agreement and they're coming around, and I think that I'm laughing, but in the moment, these are all like, this isn't just Ryan, plugging North Point here. These things happen. It's happened.
They do.
I would say it's happened to us at least 8 or 9 times so far this year. I mean,
Absolutely.
It's happening every single day, and the only person that's hurting is the clients, because it's not their fault either. They don't know where they go. They're getting an ad for Rocket Mortgage or whatever these other big companies are, and that's what they're doing. If Ryan spent all his money on advertising for North Point, he wouldn't have any time, to service the place the way he does. So I think that there's a huge disservice being done in the lending space, and it's on all realtors and collectively to do some research and say, no, you need to go with Ryan. Put your foot down. I have a Ryan rule now. I mean, we will not let our clients, I guess we can't force them, but as second someone says Rocket Mortgage, we stop the whole conversation. And I explain, hey, here's the 7 transactions, and while they might be great, if there's anything wrong or requires a human being to think critically, these bigger companies can't get it done. If you can fit into a nice box and, pass over the money, easy down payments, no outside extenuating circumstance whatsoever, okay, Rocket Mortgage will be perfect. But most people don't live conventional lives. Right? How many people actually have nothing come up over the span of the 6 months that it takes to buy a house? How about in 30 days? I mean, it's crazy.
No, they're built for economies of scale. It's like Coca-Cola. Do you think Coca-Cola cares if you don't like their Coke? No. Go buy someone else's Coke. They move on to the next one, right? So it's like go buy Pepsi, and that's where it's the same thing with Rocket Mortgage. It's like their goal is volume. So if they mess up 5% of the transactions, that's 95% success at that scale is a success. But the problem is that more and more people are falling into the 5% range because of how tight some of the numbers are and all the nuances that we're seeing in the profiles. And then you have the whole other subset where maybe you have an easy profile, but just something happens in the deal. The appraisal challenge or whatever the case. I mean, we've had plenty of situations where they had a horrible appraisal and they won't redo it. And we just come in and do a new appraisal and we close the deal. So it's the little things. They put up roadblocks and red tape because of, bureaucracy, really. But But yeah, I think that's a good point for people to think about. It's just whether you use me or not, which shame on you if you don't. But if you don't use me, just vet your people, vet your lender, vet your real estate agent. I mean, obviously you know who to call up in Lebanon, just call Spenser, but you just vet your people, make sure they're available to you, ask them about their experience, not years in the business, but how many transactions do they close? When was their most recent transaction? Do they have any clients under contract now? Same with the lender, because I think the biggest thing you'll hear is, oh, lenders go, I've been in the business for 35 years. Okay. How many deals did you close last year? How many deals have you closed this year? How many deals do you have in the pipeline right now? Because guidelines change every day and every week. So you really doesn't matter. Experience isn't years in the business, it's transactions. So I think that's a big thing to keep in mind too. Not to say if, your mother gets licensed, don't use her, but I think it's just, it's one thing to think about. It's not years in the business, it's transactions. So
I can't stand when people say, I've been doing this for X amount of years. It's like, okay, cool.
This should be your last.
Thanks for letting me know how old you are. You know what I mean? It's just,
it's
so wild.
It's like, the guy was like, I've been doing this 35 years. Well, you had a good run, Bob. Time to hang him up.
Exactly. Tell me how a computer works. We'll see what happens from there.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say from client perspective too, why we're going down this road is, I think some red flags, to toss up here is if your lender doesn't have a story like the one we just talked about, or if your realtor is always, everything's always great and wonderful. I take care of all of it. You don't have to take care of anything. It's a smooth process. There's no such thing as a smooth process, right? You can still get something done and do it well and have bumps. That's how you get your experience, and that's how you make a transaction move. Is you don't want a realtor who's like, yeah, I've never had any issues. No problem. Not one of my clients ever faces adversity in any way, because ultimately it's going to come up and you want someone who can deal with it. You don't want someone who gets nervous. Given the example we just had of, hey, all of a sudden my client's financing, plan just disappeared. It evaporated, for no fault of anybody's own. You have to have some confidence. You have to have some word. I'm really not doing well with my vocab words today, but being humble about it, we've had some bumpy transactions. The clients have gotten what they wanted. They secured their house. They got good terms, but did we have some twists and turns during it? Absolutely. You don't want someone who sugarcoats the process. Buying a house is hard. It should be hard, right? It's the biggest purchase you're going to make for a long time. It's not supposed to be totally easy.
Right. And I would agree with that. I think that you want someone who gives you the truth. Like, yeah, there are things that come up, but you know what? That's why you have me, because I'm here to make sure we get everything solved. We have a plan and we overcome them as easily as possible. But there's very few seamless transactions. They happen. Maybe not for, you haven't had a good streak, but maybe they do happen. But it's not the norm.
All of our clients always close. I think
close.
That's becoming like our niche is,
and on time.
We'll get it done no matter what it takes. Exactly. On time, it's always, happens, but we're getting really damn good at fielding obstacles. Your financing evaporates overnight. I'm your guy. You know what I mean? I know how we're going to get this done. All of a sudden something comes up personally, we got it. We can handle it.
Absolutely. That's how you have to be. That's how you have to be. So I want to, I know we've talked a little, not doom and gloom, but we talked a little bit about some challenges we faced and some things to look out for in your team. But I want to transition a little bit as we kind of wrap up here to talk about what's your expectation, for the rest of this year? Like, how do you see, the market playing out? Not to hold you to it, but what would your prediction be for the end of 2025 as far as general buyer activity, seller activity, pricing? What's kind of your expectation as we turn the corner here on the second half of summer?
Like I said when we kicked this podcast off earlier, I'm amped up for some movement here on the seller side. We represent quite a few sellers, and yeah, it probably means some price cuts are coming, but it also means that they're going to achieve their goal of like moving on. They want the house to sell. They want the highest and best. If the highest and best, 6 months ago was 20, 30 grand higher than it is now, and that's shifted, well, what's better? Would you rather give up the 500 or 600 grand over the loss of the 20? Or would you rather sit and just, not be able to move on with your life and kind of progress in your own plan? On the buyer side, I'm super encouraged for the end of 2025. I wish, Ryan, you guys could get better at predicting interest rates for me, but I really believe that if we have any form of pressure alleviation, meaning we get any movement in these interest rates, or we can just get a little bit more confidence in the direction of where the world's going. It seems like every day things are on fire. If it's not one thing, it's another. I think buyers will feel a little bit more secure to deploy the money they've been waiting. This whole thing is about everybody wants a house, right? I don't care if you're, Bill Gates or somebody who doesn't have as many resources as Bill Gates, right? Like the goal is to build some wealth and get a roof over your head and, start your family, protect your family, give your family a place to go. And I think there's a lot of people who've been waiting to do that, and they just don't have the confidence to do it yet, but it's coming. And I think once we get a little stability in there, if interest rates come down, there's a large group of folks who are ready to go and find a house, and they're ready to fight for it too. That's the piece that's exciting on my end. Our buyers are geared up. They are ready to we're going to hit open houses on Saturdays. We know exactly what the kind of kitchen is we want. We know how many bedrooms we want. We, love this street, not that street. We want to be 10 minutes to XYZ. It's given them time to do their research and be very tactile about it. And we're just waiting for the floodgates to open.
I love it.
So I'm hoping the floodgates open by the end of the year, but that's not to say people aren't still buying houses. We're still just as busy. I just think it's going to see an increase. And to be honest, it's very exciting. I'm not saying that to be, salesy or anything like that. I am genuinely excited to start going into houses and being okay, Mr. Seller, this one came in maybe 20 grand less than you wanted, but it's an offer. And you know what? The buyer is going to love your house as much as you did, right? When it's so transactional and just, they gave me what I wanted and I moved on, it's monotonous. And buying a house shouldn't be it. It should be exciting and a big deal. I think we got away from how big of a deal it is to buy a house because less people have been able to buy homes. We just need to restore that confidence and energy. And I think we're getting there.
I love it. I love it. I think we need that. I think buyers and sellers need to hear that. What you just said right there, that it should be fun. It should be exciting. It's a big process. It's a big move. It's a big transaction. You should be excited. And I think, as you mentioned, once buyers have just a little bit more of confidence and a little bit more buying power and leverage, whether that's a combination of a signal from the Fed that they're going to cut rates or they do cut rates, and then just some more, I'd say, consistent economic updates. It's just some more consistency across the board on what's going on and, all the different facets of our economy that you're seeing everywhere all over the news. I think once we just get a little bit more of solid footing, I think buyers are going to start to come out of the woodwork again. If rates come down another 0.25%, and then maybe, who knows, the proposal to eliminate the capital gains tax on primary residence sales, if that passes, I think maybe we'll get a little bit more inventory hitting the market. And if we just get a little bit more, solid footing on what's happening, with the U.S. international relations and inflation with the tariffs, and just get a little bit more, surety, I think that's kind of what people are waiting for right now. And I think it could be a really great half of the year if we just get a little bit from each of those.
We're not talking thousands and thousands of dollars. No. I mean, we're talking people getting the breathing room of, an extra $100, $200 a month. This isn't, hey, I need to save, $6,000 a month, or that's totally unrealistic, right? They just want a little bit of breathing room. And on the seller side, I honestly think that at the end of the year too, and why the sellers might come around is, this is all about money at the end of the day, right? It's about security for your family and money, And so when you can transfer your biggest asset into cash, and maybe some of that's going to offset your retirement, maybe some of that is going to fund a college, for your kids, people are waiting to do it. They want to do it. We're not quite there yet.
Almost.
And let me drop one more little plug here for both North Point and then for your clients, in audience, Ryan. I like to think I'm a pretty energetic guy overall. Buying houses, your realtor should be ready to rise to the occasion. I'm not saying everybody has to get excited like I just got the last, 3 minutes talking about buying a house, right? But they should have a pulse here. They should understand what's going on. They should be able to share that information, make you feel good about it. You should be excited to go look at homes. Now, are you going to be excited to see your realtor every time? Probably not. But you should feel pretty good about the transaction as a rule. If you're not really gassed up to go see your fifth house with the person you're working with, they may not be the right fit. And again, the final drop to the audience, you're the client. If you don't like your realtor, you don't like the vibe, you don't like what's going on, change it. Don't go all the way through a transaction with somebody you can't. The word vibe, again, I'm lacking on the vocab words here, but you got to vibe with the people who are doing this, right? And if you don't, you can't just be like, wow, that's the only way I'm getting a house. It's not, right? The market
100%.
is about to turn. There's a lot going on in the world. It's a period of instability and uncertainty. And when you find somebody who can kind of be that rock, meaning lenders and realtors, especially good ones, it'll make the world a difference. And you'll be more excited and happy about whatever decision you make, whether you're buying or selling.
100%.
That's I know I'm getting combative now across the podcast, but the days of monotonous transactions are over.
Are you sure you want me to put your contact info in the show notes?
Yeah, bring it on.
I love it. Bring
it on.
People need a little more zest anyway. I agree. It's not arms and legs. We're buying a house. Let's have some fun.
Exactly.
But I know we're approaching our hour here, so I wanted to transition to kind of closing things out as we wrap up. But I loved all the points we talked about, and I think your passion for what you do speaks volumes. I already would want someone on my team who has that energy and has that excitement, because I want to be excited too. I'm buying a house. I don't want to have to worry about things. I want to just enjoy the experience. And I think that's the difference is, people who strive for seamless transactions don't always strive for an enjoyable experience, and it should be. So I love to hear that.
I think that's another thing to stand out from. You just have to be pleasant, really, at the end of the day, right? It's just being human.
I 100% agree. And I wanted to pose a question to end things off, and it was a question that Ben and I actually chatted about in our earlier episode, and I thought it was a pretty good question. So I wanted to fire this off to you as we end the show today. Usually, obviously, I end each episode with some sort of thought-provoking question or valuable resource for the audience. Favorite book recommendations, favorite podcast recommendations, or just a thought to think about as they head on their way if they're still listening at minute 56. But my question for you is, who would you say you look up to the most right now, and why?
Personally or professionally? Or you want those to be the same thing?
Wherever your mind takes it.
Okay, let me break it out into two things. And I'm going to need about 2 minutes, a minute for each answer here. So hopefully I'm not taking too much more of your time. But I think professionally, and I'm going to speak very generally here, I really look up to individuals who are not only confident in themselves, but they have no brain space or desire to impress other people. They are who they are. They're existing in this world. In speaking in terms of business, right? They're taking care of their clients and building their own life and helping their family, but they're not doing it in a way that is showy or pushing out, hey, look at this, look at me, look how great I am. I think in the world that we live in today, it's very easy to go down those roads. It's actually easier to just join the club of look at how awesome I am, versus kind of doing the work silently and just taking care of the person. And I've come across the more transactions we do, I'm pretty young in my market. I work most of the time with people who are, double my age. The most successful producers are the ones who are the most humble in many cases. Mm-hmm. You would never know they're selling 50-something homes a year because they're not posting things on Facebook and they're not running ads everywhere about how great they are. They're decent, kind, awesome human beings who really care about the person in the transaction. And I think on the personal side of when you look at those people too, they also care about their friends and family deeply, and they don't need the validation from the external world of, well, I'm good at XYZ because, I'm at all my kids' soccer games or whatever it is. Or I sell 50 houses a year, I make X amount in commission. The benchmark really doesn't fall monetarily or on vanity. It's really more about, I actually helped 50 people move on from a house. And maybe it was a first-time home buyer, maybe it was the CEO of XYZ, right? But they don't really care about those things as much. They're really honed in on the human side of it. And professionally, I think it's growing through that. As I interact more with those individuals, I definitely find myself looking up to them and saying, that's a goal I want to get to. I want to be someone who strays away from the vanity and the flashiness and focuses on the human being, because that business model works, like we were just talking about. We just had a crazy transaction. The only thing we really did differently is we showed up for the person. Like, we didn't really do anything outside of the norm of this process. We showed up and said, we'll help you, right? You showed up on the lending side better than Rocket Mortgage did, or whatever the company was that they were with originally.
Right.
On the realtor side, they're not even our clients, and we showed up to help them, right? And look what happens for everybody involved. So I think professionally, I would say that's who I look up to is the folks who really understand that the world is about individuals and human beings and not about the flashiness and all the signs and the glory per se.
I love it.
Personally, if I had to, name or name drop, I have to think about that one for like a few seconds here, but I would say, that's a hard one. I look up to a lot of different people personally, across the board.
Is there a celebrity?
Everyone's like, oh my. No, I don't know if it's a celebrity. I think I'm really trying to think long and hard about it because it could go in so many different directions. But
if you don't have a name,
I guess I'll answer kind of generally on the personal side too. I really look up to people who do what I just said on the professional side personally. The mom and dads who have worked 20 years, they put a roof over their kid's house, and maybe it's not a mansion, right? But it's a house, and they're working a couple jobs to get there. Or personally, I work a lot with first-time home buyers. We've dealt with some first-time home buyers who, if you knew where they came from and where they're at, you would be like, are you kidding? Like, how did you do that? And so personally, I think people who have grit are somebody I look up to a lot.
I love it.
People who really just understand what life is, and they don't let life wear them down. Unlike us realtors, who I killed in close, or I had to change my mortgage lender for the third time, whatever it is. But I think personally, it's people with grit. That's who I
love it.
Look up to.
I love it. And that for people listening, that you can think about what traits you would embody. And the question when it was spit back at me earlier, I had said, Alex. Well, I picked a person, which I would be in a similar boat where if you asked me the question, I probably wouldn't pick a particular person. But on the spot, I chose Alex Hermosi, which I feel like at this point in my entrepreneur journey, he embodies his philosophy and mindset is very in line with everything you just said. Do the work, you'll get the outcome. If you do the work, you show up, and don't take life too seriously. Like he obviously goes to the extreme. We're all going to die in the end, of course. He always says, and no one's going to remember you in 100 years if you don't do anything impactful. So, it's all about the relationships you value. And obviously from his business perspective, he talks a lot about really systems and leadership, which that's something I'm very focused on right now, is optimizing my systems and becoming a better leader, to grow a team. But from the personal side of things, he definitely echoes a lot of those points that you just hit on too.
Yeah, I would, excuse me, I would totally agree with that. I just think that those are what matter. Gone are the days of, everyone can be a TikTok, what is it called? A TikTok influencer or an influencer on Instagram. You know what I mean? Like those are way more generic. Finding people who get it and understand what like life is about. I think that's the new form of popularity, right? That's the new thing. Like, how do I show up as a human being for people around me?
Right. That's not enough people ask themselves that question. So I love it. I love it. Well, always great chatting with you, my friend. I know, if you don't know Spenser and I, we have talks like this often, just, pick up the phone and chatting about life and business. So always great to, share a piece of that with everyone else. And if you want to get in touch with Spenser, I will leave his information in the show notes so you can reach out to him, connect about real estate, life, or whatever else you may be interested in.
Awesome. Ryan, it's been fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Spenser, thanks as always. I'll catch up to you soon.